This episode is brought to you by Iams Pet Food. When you choose Iams dry dog or cat food, you can see a difference in your pet with your own eyes. Healthy energy in 5 days, healthy digestion in 10 days, and healthy skin and coat in just 25 days. Satisfaction for you and them. Guaranteed or your money back. Feed Iams dry dog or cat food and see a visible difference. Visit iams.com/difference to learn more.
Now, two pigeons bemoaning the fact you can stream DirecTV satellite-free.
These humans can stream all the top-rated national news channels on DirecTV, and now with no satellite dish.
This just in. Weather, sports, election coverage. DirecTV has it all, but something is missing. The satellite dish.
What are you doing?
I'm reporting the news. Back to you, Bob.
Here's some news. You're a buffoon.
Stream the top-rated national news channels. No satellite dish. Visit DirecTV.com. Internet required. Top-rated news based on 2023 Nielsen ratings.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check you have the tickets in your wallet first before you drive 2 hours to the big game. Seriously, you had one job. Now the closest you'll get to the 50-yard line is parking lot D. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Hello there, and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast, with me, your host, Rich Ferraro. In just a second, I'm going to be joined by Baz, as we're going to be talking about discipline. We're going to be talking about results so far, and are we exceeding expectations with Forest currently in the top half of the table? And we'll also be speaking to a dad and his son who go to watch a Forest women's team and why they enjoy going there, what their highlights have been so far. So, firstly, welcome to you, Baz.
Hello.
Hello there. And yes, I almost stumbled across myself because I was going to say Forest are in 6th position, but of course Chelsea did win on the weekend, and it means that Forest have gone down to now 7th, having been in the heady heights of 5th on Friday night and Saturday morning. I say we'll talk about that in a little while, but first we are going to talk about the fact that Forest have got a discipline problem, apparently. We're not going to talk in depth about the Chelsea melee and the fine that has been awarded. Safe to say that Forest have been fined more than the Blues, and that will probably be covered in our Friday 5 news roundup, the ins and outs of that. However, one of the key things is that Forest got fined a lot more than their opponents. And the reasoning for that is because they've had a lot more indiscretions over the past few years. So, Baz, do Forest have a discipline problem?
Yes and no. I think you could argue that we have been treated unfairly. I suspect that, but yeah, we keep on probably stepping over the line. I also suspect that there are some Anglo-Greek cultural differences at play.
Go on. Do say more.
Well, for example, I do remember reading that after the infamous Everton tweet, that Mr. Marinakis was shocked by the public reaction, which, given what he does in Greece pretty much every week after Olympiacos don't win, then that's not really a surprise. And likewise, spitting's completely and utterly taboo in this country, but it might be, I don't know for a fact, but it might be different in Greece.
I think I have read something along those lines that it's way more normal in Greece for people to spit, yes. I mean, having said that, this is a good time to remind ourselves that the reason that Mikel Arteta got COVID, which caused the cancellation of football in England for 2 months, was because he'd picked it up off of Evangelos Marinakis. So make of that what you will. Anyway, but I think there's a couple of things that are worth pointing out. First of all, let's hear a clip from the Married on the Midlands, who on the Friday 5 pointed out that actually a lot of the problems wouldn't have occurred if Mr. Marinakis just didn't go down into the tunnel area.
None of these things would be happening if he wasn't down on the pitch. No other owner or chairman is ever down there in this country. You never see anybody else. It's just attention grabbing, attention seeking. There's no need for him to be there. If he's not there, none of this happens.
Baz, Maradona's got a point, hasn't he? It's like you mentioned earlier, it's probably a bit more normal in Greece for owners to be on the pitch and to be a bit more involved.
And carrying a gun.
Well, I wasn't going to go there, but you did. And it's one of those things whereby owners are, they really carry the expectations of the club on their shoulders. And I think Mr. Marinakis is probably just doing that a little bit, but it is unusual in this country to see owners, even chairmen, heading down to the playing area, isn't it? So is it part of the fact that he's doing that because to him that's normal, even though it's not normal in this country? The fact that he's a big guy and has, shall we say, you can understand why people might feel he's got quite a menacing presence. And maybe that has been the root of some of the problems.
And he's also the sort of, by the many accounts I've heard, I have a number of Greek friends, and he's quite well known in Greece for being an intimidating character who likes to get his own way. So yeah, I could see how that probably comes across quite badly in the sort of dusty boardrooms of the FA.
Taking all things into consideration, it was probably reasonable for him to be fined for spitting in the vicinity of the officials, wasn't it?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, okay. And with that in mind, I guess what I'm going to go to next is, we've heard lots and lots of conspiracy theories, some from Forest fans saying that the authorities are against them, and some generally from the other 14 saying the big six have got it all going for them. I'm just going to play devil's advocate here and just say, I don't think there are any conspiracy theories. I think a lot of Forest's problems in terms are of their own making. So if you look at the reports from the Chelsea panel, then they say that one of the reasons that the fines are what they are is, and they listed a whole litany of instances where the club have been fined over the last few years for indiscipline. And just looking at that here, so we've got all the way back down to the Derby match, which I believe was the one where Brice Samba got his Mr. Bump bandage and then just stood there staring at Derby players at the end when Ravel Morrison was sent off. Now, what we're talking about is essentially a 3-year period where Forest have been fined. I think this is their 6th fine for on-pitch discipline, where there's been basically a bit of argy-bargy. So having a sliding scale of fines for not learning your lesson, is that unreasonable?
Yeah, but then, I mean, if you look at what Enzo Maresca said after the Chelsea brawl, he was like, yeah, I want to see some fighting spirit amongst my players. I mean, Brice Samba punching Phil Jagielka in the head, while hilarious, probably was a bit over the line. But you don't want Morgan Gibbs-White to not leap into those sort of challenges, because that's the sort of thing that he's done time and time again and saved us from counterattacks. So you want players to, and you look at what Ryan Yates does every day, that's a vital part of our game now. So we want our players to be on the edge. We want the entire team to have the same mentality. It's just how you cope with going over the edge. I don't want to see a team that's like utterly boring and just sits there and takes it all the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things, again, that the report points out is that, you know, players on both sides are saying, well, they started it, which is clearly not true. And of course, Forest fans are saying that the Chelsea players started it, and Chelsea fans are saying, well, it was because Nico Williams assaulted Cucurella. Now, I will point out that Nico was quite justifiably yellow carded for that. But Nico was also operating in retaliation for the fact that Cucurella had barged Elanga off the ball. So, you know, there's always going to be some he said, she said about that kind of thing, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's just what would you want your players to react like when things happen on the pitch. You want them to have a bit of fight about them. But I don't know. Having said that, yeah, none of our players punched another one in the face. So there you go.
So that brings us on to another thing, which is that, and as I said, the ins and outs of it is going to be discussed in our Friday 5 bulletin later in the week. But the other thing that's worth mentioning, I guess, is that with the melee, yes, Nicholas Jackson clearly slapped Morato in the face. There's clear video evidence. The referee didn't see it, fine. VAR saw it and said, nah, not a problem. And then afterwards, they looked at it and said, yeah, he slapped him, it's not a problem. And then since then, we saw Mohamed Kudus basically go a bit mental last week, slap a player in the face, get sent off. He's facing additional ban time in the same way as Morgan Gibbs-White was for a lack of discipline after the card was given. So there's two things there. One is a lack of consistency because Jackson got away with it. And then number two is that there is consistency because Morgan, although the panel decided, key match instance panel decided that no, it shouldn't, they didn't think it was a second yellow. The fact is the second yellow was produced even after the referee had said the ball had been won. So the circumstances were contentious. Morgan still reacted in a way that he probably shouldn't have done by swearing at the officials in the way that he did, and that's why he's got the extra ban. Kudus is facing, it hasn't been given yet, an extra ban for a lack of discipline after the card was produced. So you could argue there's consistency there. So again, on both sides, there's arguments to say things are good, things are not good.
Yeah, but what you could say is the consistency is in the FA clamping down after mistakes have been made. Is one way of looking at it.
Okay. And this is something, of course, we have talked about in our last Forest Ramble podcast, and we've talked about in Friday 5, which is there is probably a problem with standards of refereeing because, I mean, I'll give you another example. There have been several matches, including some Forest matches. The match against Brighton is a good example, where the number of cards produced during a game is just astronomical. We're seeing it regularly happening, whereby Premier League match will finish with 8, 10, 12 bookings in matches which aren't that dirty. So, again, I'll put both sides of the argument. One is that referees have got these guidelines where they're saying, okay, if it's a yellow card offence, I'm going to produce a yellow card. And then on the other hand, we've got the argument to say, if it's not a dirty game, you let a little bit go. And therefore you're not producing cards unnecessarily. If you're referees, you're going to say, no, we need to punish things. And if you're players and fans, you're going to say, we don't want to see unnecessary cards.
Well, and the counter argument to that is, on the one hand, people are saying we need referees to show more consistency. And then you're then saying, but we also need them to show some judgment and let things go. Or if it is a dirty game, let something that maybe wouldn't have been a yellow card in another situation get a yellow card. So you're arguing for consistency on one hand and variation on the other. So the two things are in opposition in many ways.
I'm just going to throw one more thing out there about the Chelsea situation. Chelsea have, in a third of their matches, had 6 or more players booked in a match. If you have more than 5 players booked in 90 minutes, it triggers an automatic fine. And it seems as though the panel aren't taking Chelsea's discipline this season into consideration. They're not taking into account the Jackson slap. They're not taking into account the number of bookings Chelsea have had, nor the fact that Maresca has said, actually, I quite like my players having a bit of a ruck. Does that seem fair to you?
On one side of it, I can kind of understand it. As you say, we've got 3 years of history of this, whereas Chelsea don't. But I mean, I can't get over the Jackson slap. Mm-hmm. It's not like when they reviewed it after the game. That's the thing that gets me about it. It's like, yeah, it's one thing for the referee to make a mistake. It seems relatively common for VAR to make a mistake, but in the cold light of day, when your job is purely to review something, I don't understand why they got away with that. If in 2 years' time Chelsea are still not getting slapped down in the way that we are, and if they've carried on with that same behaviour, then there would be an injustice to look at there.
You're assuming Maresca's still going to be the manager there in 2 years' time, aren't you? So, now, of course, there was an incident. Okay, so there was an incident with a penalty at the weekend in one of the other matches, and I'm just going to remind myself of the details, but it was in the Man United match, wasn't it? And the penalty that was given to West Ham, which, frankly, all biases aside, I'm going, that was a ridiculous award of a penalty. It was one of those whereby the referee gave one thing, VAR told him to go to the monitor. I thought it was a perfectly fair challenge, two players going for a 50-50. Yes, there was contact, but football is a contact sport. And this brought me to mind of something that Stephen has said in one of our previous podcasts, which is, I think that when there is a senior and a junior ref, so in this case, David Coote was the on-pitch ref and Michael Oliver was VAR. And it seems quite often, no matter what that dynamic is, quite often the junior ref seems to defer to what the senior ref is saying. So if the senior ref is on the pitch and the junior ref is on VAR, then the VAR will go, no, you're absolutely right. Your decision stands. Whereas in this instance, David Coote was told by Michael Oliver, go and have a look at the monitor. We think it should be a penalty. It seems, I have no evidence, but it feels like that happens a lot.
And I think part of it is, it is almost like a piece of theatre, which when you go over to the monitor, there's that expectation then that it's going to happen. You hear fans say it all the time, oh, he's gone over to the monitor, so it's going to get given now. It is that, especially if you spend 2 minutes staring at the screen, like watching the replay over and over again. It's almost like once you've got that far, you can't back down.
Even though the longer it takes, there's an argument to say, actually, maybe it is just one of those things and the referee's initial, if you have to look at it for that long, is it clear and obvious?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a lot to... it's not a debate we're going to win, is it? That's the trouble. But we'll come back to it in a few minutes. In part two, we're going to hear from, a dad and his son who are going to Forest Women and talking about the community side of things. And then Baz and I will have a little chat about how Forest are doing so far this season.
Hey, it's Austin James. Yes, I'm living with diabetes, but it doesn't have to define me. Thanks to the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor, I get real-time glucose readings throughout the day. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor is small and easy to wear, giving me the freedom to focus on my life as a parent and a musician. Now this is progress. You can get a free sensor at freestylelibre.us.
Offer available for people who qualify. Visit myfreestyle.us to see all terms and conditions. Certain exclusions apply. Data on file, Abbott Diabetes Care. For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Hello and welcome back to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. And we're doing a little extra programme due to the break in the fixture schedule. And I'm delighted to be joined by two very, very special guests today. Regular listeners, you'll be aware of the fact that we like to try and hear the voices of the fans at least once in a while. We are a fan-led podcast after all. So for those of you who listened to us way, way, way back in the day, you may remember a familiar voice in Lord Beestonia. Matt, it's been many, many years since you've been on the podcast. How have you been doing?
Yeah, I've been all right. I think last time I actually came on the podcast, my description of the goal of the match we've just seen was a bit rubbish because I sneezed and missed the goal. I was having a sneezing fit. So I think... the match of the day didn't call me up for a job after that.
Yes, if I remember rightly, I think it's like, so what did you think of the goal, Matt? And you said, I don't know, I was blowing my nose.
Yes.
So,
I mean, that's my punditry career crashed and burned that day. So
it certainly did.
It's good to be back now.
So, and listeners, you may have noticed an extra voice there. So, Leif, welcome to the podcast on your very first appearance.
Hello.
Yeah, he's saying hello. And you are here to talk not only about supporting Forest, and for the listeners' benefit, Leif he's just taken off his Forest baseball cap, but I've seen pictures of him proudly wearing his Reds shirt and enjoying being a Reds supporter. And what a time to be alive as a Reds supporter, with Forest, of course, in the top half of the table in the Premier League. But then the other part of it, and this is where I'm bringing in Matt and Leif, is obviously the women's team are doing really, really well. Now, they're having a little break from league action at the moment, so we're not having a full-on women's show, but I really wanted to talk to you about your experiences of watching the women's team. You've been getting down to lots and lots of matches. And Matt, just to start with you, what was it about going to see the women's team that appealed?
Well, it was. I think it was when one of Lee's first matches he can really remember seeing was promotion for the men's team, and then he wanted to go to games, and obviously you don't stand a chance once they're up in the Premiership. So we started going to a few women's games and realised we first game was against Derby. That's right. We came up 2-1, so he managed to get an early Derby victory in there. And we went to see a few more matches at City Ground and up in Eastwood. And we just took off, and then we went to see them win the cup up in Burton, wasn't it? I think it was at Burton Brewers. And the Milton Keynes, where we didn't get promoted. We saw lots of we saw a load of action like that, and we've just become fans of the team. And I think also it's I do try and get him into men's matches when we can, but it's just a very good way to introduce him to the game, make him comfortable at the City Ground as well, but it's a bit more gentle when you go like that. It's a bit more family orientated, obviously, and there doesn't feel the same amount of risk. But then we've got so into it lately that now it's, I sort of look at the women's teams just as much as I look at the men's teams on how they're doing, and follow them as closely as that, which I wouldn't have thought of doing like 3 or 4 years ago. But yeah. But now, I mean, Forest men's are obviously having the best season in 30 years, 25 years, 28 years, I don't know, something crazy. The women are doing even better.
Absolutely. So, Leif, first of all, how old are you?
7 years old.
You're 7 years old, okay. And so how old were you when you went to your first ever match to watch Forest women?
5 or 4.
Yeah,
5 or 4.
It's been about 2 years, hasn't it? So,
yeah,
about 4.5, I think it was.
So, and your first ever match was beating Derby.
Yeah,
and a big smile on your face there. So, I want to ask you. So, going to the City Ground, do you think it's made a big difference to the way that the women's team are doing this season? Do you reckon it helps them?
Yeah, because these league matches are now all at City Ground.
Nearly all.
Yeah, nearly.
Yeah. And much better than going to watch them when you're having to go to Eastwood, or Long Eaton.
Yeah.
I think the atmosphere is so much better as well because you're in a proper stadium, proper stand as well.
Yeah. So Leif, that's one of the things, isn't it? It's like walking along the river before the match and then going into the ground. It must feel very special.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of the atmosphere, do you like singing along with all the other fans?
Yes, a lot. Like when it's the beginning of the time, that's when the most bit that we sing.
Yeah, and whether you're 7 or 70, it's always a good song to sing. So, Matt, coming back to you, I mean, obviously, we've seen Forest really invest in the women's team, both on and off the pitch, and we've seen the team do wonders in terms of investment and in terms of bringing in players, going professional, players who are kind of from leagues above. And have you really noticed that difference, both in terms of how the players are doing, but also in terms of what it feels like to be a fan of the Forest women's team?
Oh, absolutely. It's been like a rocket fuel put into them. It's when I heard the news that they've gone professional over summer and all that, it was brilliant because he knew that they were already good, but it's a tough league, and it's tough to get promotion. It only opened it up to Nottingham contend with the Southern League recently, but it's still tough when you get someone like Newcastle in the league with you. So we have to be contenders, and you've got some really good teams in there, like Wolves as well, doing all right, and Rugby. But they've changed. They are so much fitter on the pitch. There's so much more professionalism. They are hammering teams. I mean, it's almost embarrassing. I took Leif to the City Ground to watch the England under-21s when they beat Serbia 9-1 recently. And Trent End was singing out, "We want 10, we want 10." And I turned to Leif and went, right, don't get used to hearing that song at the Trent at the City Ground. Like, that's not happening. You will never hear that.
Yeah, and Leif, coming back to you. So I've got a couple of questions with regard to the women's team. So first of all, who's your favourite player?
Yeah, I could say
Lindsay Harkins is good, isn't she? She's like I think the core of a team. She feels like the. She's Domingo. She's fast. So Lindsay Harkins,
Sophie Domingo. I mean, our favourite player at the moment is Nat Johnson. We shouldn't say that but Nat Johnson, who's obviously a friend of the podcast. And then the other thing I want to ask you, Leif, is: do you think that Forest women are going to win the league this season?
possibly, but in this time of the season, I don't know.
Okay, but if they do win it, they'll deserve it, won't they? And if they go up, do you think they'll go up again next season? And so 2 years' time, they'll be in the WSL, I reckon?
Least probably not, but they won't. They probably won't get relegated from the Championship.
Good. I like that bit of optimism. And last thing, and I'm going to finish with you, Leif, is with the men's team, what position do you think they're going to finish in the Premier League this season?
I'm hoping above 15.
Above 15?
Above 15. Okay. Oh, well, you know what? This is a conversation we've had on the podcast many times. So, and we've all said, you know what? If we finish above 15, then that's not a bad season. It's a sign of progress. So I'm going to say thank you very much to Leif, to Lord Beestonia, and it's back to the studio. So thank you very much to Matt and to Leif for that. Baz, just one thing that I want to touch upon there. As we're recording this, Forest are doing their open training session, and, you know, obviously fans are able to turn up. There's been a little bit of controversy about whether they should open it up to everyone rather than just season ticket holders and members, but I guess they're trying to think about the numbers that might show up. But think like open training sessions, the investment into having the women's team playing at the City Ground, the investment in off-pitch facilities and so on and so forth. These are signs that, for all you can criticise Marinakis for in terms of his maybe on-pitch conduct, which sounds weird to say about an owner, but actually the one thing that's been a common thread in his years as the Forest owner is that he wants to make Forest part of the community of Nottingham.
Yeah, and I was reading some stuff about things he's done in Greece, in Athens and Piraeus, and one of the things you can say about him, not just in football terms, but in terms of his business, his many businesses, is he works very, very hard to get ordinary people on his side, and I think that's absolutely brilliant, because it's like he's obviously a very rich man and he doesn't have to do that stuff. He can make stuff happen however he wants, but he makes sure that the people that benefit from it, or the ordinary people, get a benefit from what he's doing, which is a great thing.
Yeah, and if I remember rightly, in Piraeus, he's got what's essentially a food bank program, hasn't he? So he's supporting people who maybe can't afford to feed themselves, helping them out with household items and so on and so forth.
He's even bought up a load of social housing that he gives on really cheap rent to people.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So now, I mean, so the community side of things is really important, but this segues back to one of the things that we were talking about in part one of today's podcast, which I just want to come across, because this is also referring back to a group chat that we had. So Forest are doing well in the league. They have made as many, I mean, you only have to look at Twitter after every Forest match to see the Ryan Yates issue. Marinakis isn't making too many friends. Obviously, as Forest fans, we're saying, oh, Arsenal fans are ridiculous and are moaning about refs and conspiracies and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of other fans who will also say the same. And even though some fans agree with the sentiment of the tweet, they think it's ridiculous that we put out the tweet and were rightly punished for it. And you said in our group chat, Forest are the new Millwall. Would you care to expand upon that?
Well, it comes back down to that reputation thing. So I think now, or certainly ongoing, it's going to be as soon as there's a challenge like Gibbs White's challenge, it'll get stamped down on. As soon as Nuno says anything or gesticulates from the touchline, it'll get stamped down on. As soon as Mr. Marinakis does anything at all, the FA are going to stamp down on it. And it's because it's the reputation precedes you. And so therefore, we're not going to be given the leeway that some other clubs are going to get, or most other clubs are going to get. Even if actually we're in the right, it's not going to matter now.
And is what happened in the Everton match and afterwards an example of that? We might have got given the benefit of the doubt if we hadn't already publicly written to Pogmol so many times, and then that led to the tweet, which means that we also then became, a public enemy number one to Pogmol and to the FA and the Premier League.
Yeah, and actually I think hiring Mark Clattenburg probably didn't help because he's not the most popular figure amongst his peers. Mm-hmm. And his job was basically to moan at them. So,
okay. Last but not least on this particular topic, then, I just wanted to ask you as well about, with regard to the way in which Forest have conducted themselves. You mentioned Millwall. The other parallel I'm thinking about is Man United when Alex Ferguson was in charge. The thing that Ferguson did so successfully was he built this siege mentality so that the players they felt massively united. The fans felt massively united, pardon the pun, and also meant that, frankly, refs were scared of Ferguson. And Ferguson went through the years where he didn't give post-match interviews and he just took the fines. There wasn't a sliding scale of fines as far as I'm aware then, but he just took the fines. Do you reckon that's what Forest are trying to build? And if so, is that doable in this day and age? Or are you just going to be like Millwall and no one likes us, we don't care, and you kind of revel in that?
I don't know if we're trying to build that deliberately. Although, well, I don't know if Mr. Marinakis is trying to do that deliberately. I think he's just the sort of person who, when he doesn't get his own way, will react about that. But I do think to some extent Nuno is. If you think, I didn't really follow them when he was the Wolves manager and they'd gone up and we were still down. But I can remember reading stuff about him on the touchline and him being a bit spiky in general. And the Wolves fans, when he came to us, Wolves fans saying he's not like his public persona, which was very dour and quite, again, spiky is probably the best word for it. Now you listen to his interviews, and I love listening to his interviews now because he's really, really funny and really, really dry. But you can hear him there. If there's been an incident, there's a real edge to his voice, and I think he's definitely building that sort of mentality. That's why he wants a small squad as well, so he can keep everyone going in the same direction. In fact, the first time, what's his name? Is the assistant Rui
Pedro Silva.
Oh, Pedro Silva, yeah. The first time he did the post-match interview, I think was it after Brighton?
Yeah.
Yeah, after on the red card. And you listen to him, and not only did he also have, obviously, the Portuguese accent, but the words coming out of his mouth, it could have been Nuno speaking. He was talking about the mentality and the drive and how we do things and whatever. So I think Nuno's striving for that. Everyone's heading in the same direction. Everyone's feeling the same things, has the same mentality. And us versus them definitely works on that side of things.
The thing I'd say about both Nuno and Silva's post-match interviews is that the words might be diplomatic, but the tone of voice sometimes tells a different tale, doesn't it? So what you've done neatly is moved us into affairs on and off the pitch. So firstly, it's been well debated for regular listeners about the merits of Nuno. Can we all agree that Forest thus far this season have exceeded the expectations that we would have had for them?
Yes, definitely.
And Nuno himself?
Yeah, I think so. I can understand why the Wolves fans loved him so much. Obviously, 2 7th place finishes for them. I can't see us holding this position much like for the entire season, but certainly at the start of the season we were saying we just want some progress, maybe 13th or 14th. I think if we finished 14th, in many ways that would be a disappointment now, which is an amazing thing to say.
Crucially, when you have a good start, it sets you up, doesn't it? And we've already got basically half as many points after a quarter of the season as we did throughout the whole of last season.
Yeah.
And that means that actually we're not going to need to look over our shoulder unless something massively goes wrong. And that also means as well that with just a few tweaks to the squad and a few tweaks tactically, you and I, ever since we've been podcasting, have banged on about the importance of pre-season, and never has that been more apparent. Because, in fact, even Chris Wood was saying, wasn't he, in his post-match interview on Friday, it's like, well, we tried to adopt a few bits and pieces that Nuno was telling us last season, and it saw some improvements. But now we had the pre-season, that kind of tactical approach is really, really showing through. And one of the things that I think is really important is that Forest are defending right from the front. And actually, Vardy's goal against us on Friday was a good example of what happens when you're not defending all the way through the team, because actually that goal came from the gap between midfield and attack when Harry Winks first got the ball. And so there's only so much you can blame the defenders for that one, I'd say.
It really reminded me, if you remember last year when Ryan Yates ran the entire length of the pitch against Manchester United, and you were like, where are their midfielders? And that's where we were. Luckily, it only happened just that one point. But
yeah, and you can't argue with our defensive record, and you don't have a defensive record like that unless you defend as a team.
And the other advantage of the good start is, although it makes me slightly uncomfortable that we're receiving all these plaudits and everyone's going on about how good we've been, I'd rather fly under the radar a little bit. But one advantage of it is now other teams are going to set up differently against us. They're going to be a bit more wary. I think the reason we beat Liverpool is because Arne Slot was new to the Premier League and he wasn't expecting a team at the bottom to be able to be as good as we are. So other teams now are going to be taking notice and thinking, right, rather than playing our game, we're going to have to worry about their game.
And well, you could argue actually that Leicester did that to a certain extent because they set up with Pereira as the box in the box in midfield run, playing at right back, and of course, as Yatesy explained post match, Nuno kind of was able to have the tactical tweak without having to change formation. Of course, the goal early in the half really helped, but. Just one last thing that we have seen in the last couple of matches against Palace and against Leicester is that although he's not getting a chance to get on very much, basically we're aware of the fact that Chris Wood's not going to be able to play the full season and we're going to have to wrap him up in cotton wool at certain times. So in his little 10-minute cameos, Big T is starting to look a bit like the Taiwo that we know and love again, isn't he?
Yeah, so I think if anything, he's the biggest, not downside, the worry of this season is it's everything's been going through. I think, is it 7 out of 10 goals or something has been Chris Wood?
Yeah.
So everything's been going through him. And when Taiwo's come on earlier in the season, I thought he looked absolutely short of confidence. It's not even fitness. I mean, he missed pre-season. You mentioned he born to pre-season. He missed pre-season because of some personal issue. He's obviously always had his fitness issues, but when he was coming on earlier in the season, there were points where he would break through on goal and you think Ty was going to score here, and then he would do a cutback or whatever. And I was thinking that looks like a player who's short on confidence, but certainly against Leicester, overall, he's getting back to where he needs to be. So that's good.
Yeah, and that seems like a very good place to leave it. One of the things that I like about Taiwo is that everything about him is pure wild card. You're never quite that thing that we've discussed about his kind of apparent clumsiness. But actually, I kind of like that. It's good to see. It's, as I say, it means that defenders never quite know what to do with him when he's on form. So fingers crossed that he gets a chance to get some more minutes and build himself back up. Because as we know, injuries and having to chop and change is an inevitability as the season goes on. Actually, one last thing I just want to mention before we finish up. Did you see that Milenkovic got booked on Friday night?
I saw that he got booked, but I didn't see what for.
Right, so it's his first booking of the season, which for a Premier League centre-half, after 8 matches that he's played, is incredible. And then secondly, it was for dissent. It wasn't even for a foul. And what does that tell you about the guy? I mean, we've waxed lyrical about him, but that really is incredible, isn't it?
I said again to sing his praises. I said after the Palace game, he was like ice cold throughout the entire game. You could see like this. He had that like look of determination, and he's that kind of centre half, which I've said before is he's very economical in his movements, which I really, really like in the centre half. And then at the final whistle, him and Yatesy at A block, and he just let it all out, and it was amazing to see.
Well, after Yatesy had pushed him to the front, now, so yeah. Okay, so that is a nice place to leave it, and I want to say thank you very much to Baz, thank you very much to Lord Beestonia, Matt, and his son Leif for telling us about their experience as Forest women. We will be back with the Friday 5, which surprisingly enough will be in your feeds on Friday, before we have a match report from the weekend's game against West Ham. So do stick with us. Thank you for joining us today, and come on, you Reds.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.